The Edmonton Oilers have forced a Game 7 in their second-round series with the Vancouver Canucks. The Colorado Avalanche's season has come to an end, and the Toronto Maple Leafs have a new coach. We've got all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here. Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Oilers, Nick Zararis. And Nick, big win in Game 6. What was the big difference in this pretty one-sided game, at least at the end?
The Oilers didn't get killed in their own zone. That's generally how these games have gone back and forth and why they've swung so dramatically one way or the other. No one's won 2 in a row in this series yet. And it's largely because when the Canucks have had their forecheck going, the Oilers are just in their own zone for 45 seconds, a minute and a half at a time. And last night, the Oilers were able to get out quickly. And some of that is having the benefit of last change, being able to take advantage of some more hard matchups that you would. That's also been a real noticeable theme in this series, is that the team that gets the matchups they prefer has generally fared better. It's not hard and fast. There have been situations like in Game 5, for example, Edmonton had McDavid, Draisaitl, and Hyman on the ice for both of the goals against that Vancouver had. So not hard and fast, but you combine getting out of your own zone cleanly. Stuart Skinner didn't have to do a whole lot. The Canucks just couldn't get a lot going last night offensively. I think they finished with 15 shots on goal, something like that. So you combine all of that together, and frankly, the Canucks did them a favor. Like, if we're going to be frank, the Canucks didn't play great last night. And sure, the Oilers have to convert those opportunities and score, but the Canucks just didn't look good last night. And you get all of that together, we're going to get a lopsided result like that. And what's been a very close series.
You know, you mentioned 15 shots on goal. Beyond the forecheck, is Edmonton doing anything exceptionally well in their own zone defensively?
I think they've accepted that they're not going to win a lot of foot races to those pucks in the corners, and they've kind of taken more of a defensive posture where they're going to be more inclined to block shots and try and break up that cross seam pass, because Vancouver's got a lot of high-end talent where if they can establish possession in the offensive zone, they're going to whip the puck around the perimeter, trying to manipulate that defense into a better position. And for all of their warts as a defense, the Oilers got some big boys back there. You know, Nurse is really big. Desharnais is very big. Ekholm is very good at blocking shots. You get that in conjunction with not having to play as much defense. That's the key for the Oilers. If they don't have to play a ton of defense, their defense is pretty good. It's when they're in their own zone for extended periods of time, that's where it kind of breaks down, because none of them are particularly fast other than Evan Bouchard. And when you lose those foot races consistently, it's hard to get in good positions. It's hard to maintain the defensive intensity you need to be successful for more than 30 to 40 seconds at a time, because it's just not physically feasible.
You mentioned Evan Bouchard. He has stood out at many points during this series. Talk to me about his game and its importance to the Oilers' success in both ends of the ice.
I would say Bouchard is probably their most important player that's not McDavid or Draisaitl, and that's not really saying a lot because the Oilers rely a lot on their big guys. You know, when you go look at like time on ice, the Oilers have 5 of the top 20 guys in time on ice. It's McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Bouchard, and then Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. They ask a lot from their guys, to their best players, to really carry a heavy load. Bouchard's great. His one flaw, he's not overly physical. He can get in trouble in his own zone because he's not going to win a lot of physical battles, but he's got really strong positioning. I would say that's probably his best trait, is that he generally is where he needs to be. And that sets up a lot of things, whether it's defensively and preventing offense from happening to begin with, or in the case of last night, you know, he's able to leak out where somebody's supposed to be marking him on the one-timer he ultimately scores on there. He has enough understanding of what's going on around him. And something else the Oilers do that I personally don't think a lot of teams do, And it's risky to overload it the way they do, but they play Bouchard with McDavid pretty much exclusively, where those two are going to be on the ice at the same time, and they're really going to try and tilt the ice in those limited minutes, those stretches where they're on the ice together. The defense has to respect McDavid, so that gives Bouchard a lot more room, and as we've seen, he's got a big shot.
Zach Hyman has played very well throughout these playoffs, been very productive. What has he done so successfully to get as many points and goals as he has?
I think he's got elite positioning, and I think he's really got a good understanding of how to play off of McDavid. That's the big thing. Everybody says, well, yeah, he rides shotgun with the best player in the world. Of course, he's going to put up points. We all made those jokes about Chris Kunitz all those years with Sid. It's the same principle, but Hyman is just better than Chris Kunitz ever was. I mean, Chris Kunitz never even sniffed 50 goals. Hyman's got elite positioning. He wins a lot of battles with his body, with his size. He out leverages guys where he's willing to get low, engage with defensemen around the net front, and wait for the play to develop. And it's not easy. You know, that's the hardest space on the ice to occupy, right in front of the net, because you got the goalie bumping you from behind and you got defensemen bumping you from behind. So his positioning has been outstanding. And his ability to just kind of stick with it, where he's getting slashed, he's getting hooked, he's getting knocked down, but he stays with the play. I mean, the goal that he scored last night where Shilov's probably should have had it, he's getting cross-checked in the back as he's falling over, putting that shot on net. So that type of determinedness, that ruggedness, you add that to a reasonably high-end set of offensive skills and put him on a team where all he's got to do is get to his spot and then hit his shot. It's a really good combination. And it's not something I don't think anybody saw this caliber of player in Zach Hyman a couple years ago, but it's a testament to understanding what you might be able to do with somebody, and a really good reflection on the Oilers pro personnel people who saw somebody that he's got talent, but we think we could do more with this.
You talked about matchups and the importance of that last change. Obviously, in Game 7, the Oilers will not have that last change. What matchups do they look to set up, and what matchups do they look to avoid in Game 7?
See, it's an interesting question because the matchups the Oilers have wanted have worked for them at home, but in Vancouver, when they've gotten the matchups they like, it just hasn't worked to the same degree. And maybe it's just simply this is a weird series. These are two very close teams. It's hard to get a real good read on who's outplaying who. Like last night, I think JT Miller was on the ice for 2 goals against. The night before, they scored 2 goals for with him against McDavid. So I don't think there's a hard and fast, we want this versus that. I think the biggest thing for the Oilers is protecting the guys in the lineup where they can. That Nurse-Desharnais pair has been okay as the third pair because they don't play a ton of minutes. But in Vancouver, when they're not going to have the benefit of knowing who's going to be out there against them, that's a cause for concern. And then the bottom 6, you know, they've got talented players. Dylan Holloway's had a nice series. Corey Perry is still getting to the net front, still being annoying, but if those guys are out there against Pettersson and the Swedes line or against JT Miller, that's going to be a little bit of a harder matchup. So there's not exactly a stead, this is the matchup you want because it's gone back and forth, because these teams are very close, just being frank.
So what is the key to winning Game 7?
Playing as little defense as possible. Do not make the difference in this game be Stuart Skinner, because you're probably not going to like that result. And Skinner is a young goalie. He is very up and down, and I think it's really just a reflection of confidence. They didn't ask him to do a lot last night. He was fine. He was more than adequate, ready for the moment. There's not a lot of games you're only going to have to make 15 saves in the NHL in today's game. It's just not a realistic strategy going forward. So minimize your defensive responsibility, and most importantly, make the Canucks play defense. The Oilers have gotten a lot of silly goals off of pucks deflecting off of people. Shilovs has all of 16, 17 games of NHL experience. Make their goalie be the difference, not yours. You put enough pressure on them, make Tyler Myers, make Ian Cole, make their questionable defensemen play defense as opposed to yours. That's the key for the Oilers. Minimize your risks. And I think the other thing is they're burning the candle at both ends very aggressively with their minutes allocations for a lot of these guys. They're going to have real issues if they win Game 7 into the next round, because some of these guys just physically aren't going to be able to hold up. I'll be very curious to see if we see Draisaitl and McDavid together for long stretches of this game, if it's close or if the Oilers are trailing. because that's generally been their fire extinguisher. If things are going bad, put your two best players on the ice and try and win those minutes at all costs.
Going to be an interesting Game 7. I know you will have the Oilers covered every step of the way in the playoffs and beyond. Nick, tell our listeners and our viewers where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media.
So Locked On Oilers, wherever you get your podcasts, over on YouTube, every day, Monday to Friday, on the weekends when there are games, on the weekends as well. Follow me on Twitter at Nick Zararis. Other than that, thanks for having me, Gil.
All right, Nick, thanks. Always a pleasure. Today's episode is brought to you by Policy Genius. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million worth of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help talk you through it. You can easily compare quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks to find your lowest price. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL or click in the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL, policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Maple Leafs, David Morassutti, and big news over the weekend, David. New coach in Toronto, Craig Berube. Your initial thoughts on this hire?
Not surprising considering he was viewed as the leading candidate right from the start. I mean, if you look at even the betting odds on FanDuel, he was like number one, even when it was when they made the move to get rid of to fire Sheldon Keefe. So not overly surprising, and it kind of aligns to, I think, the direction that this team wants to go.
So when you say the direction this team wants to go, in what way?
I think just, you know what, this is a team that's failed to get over the hump far too much, and general manager Brad Living said we need a new voice, and when he said that, I don't think that was too much of a shot at Keefe in terms of his coaching style. I think Keefe is a good coach. The results in the regular season speak for themselves. But the playoffs are another animal, and you really need that coach that's going to be able to get that little extra more out of the players and get them ready for the playoffs, right? The playoff moment, making sure they understand the standard that they need to play with right from the start of the season to then coming into the playoffs, because we hear all the time the playoffs are different, right? It's a different animal. And personally, I think the issue with the Leafs is that they play one way in the regular season, and in the playoffs they try to play a totally different style. That doesn't work. You need to be a consistent team from the start of the year to the playoffs, establish your identity, and I feel like that's something they didn't really do well, and I think Craig Berube will really hone that in right from training camp. I think the honesty he'll bring. They always say the country club atmosphere in Toronto is going to be gone under Craig Berube. We'll see how much of that holds true. But I do think that they need someone that's going to really get this group to play how they need to play right from the start of the season.
So the old cliche about coaching changes is you always add a coach who's kind of the opposite of the guy you just let go. In what ways do you think that Craig Berube fits that mold right now?
I think he's going to make this team accountable when they don't bring the effort, right? Sheldon Keefe at times, like, you know, I went back and watched the old Amazon documentary from when they played in the bubble in 2021 and 2021, and that was a coach who definitely was trying to get the players to accountable with how they're playing. But it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. And, you know, if a player doesn't do what needs to be done, Craig Berube is not going to hesitate to call them out or, you know, do other things that are going to make the player realize that the standard isn't good enough, right? When they don't have a good night. There's been too many times where this team has taken opponents lower in the standings not seriously, and it's led to an embarrassing loss, and they look uninspired and things like that. That's not going to happen under Craig Berube. Craig Berube is going to make sure that this team is every night. They know what they need to do. They're going to have to bring an effort every single night. I wouldn't say that they didn't do it under Sheldon Keefe, but you could tell that there were times where they needed someone to rein it in a little bit more, and Keefe wasn't really doing that for this group.
Is there one or two players that you feel will benefit most from the change in style that Berube is going to bring?
I'm kind of hoping that it's on the back end. I want to see Morgan Rielly. Like, we talk a lot. Everyone's going to probably bring up Matthews, Nylander. I think Morgan Rielly is someone that needs that tough coaching. He's had good moments in his career, but I feel like this was a down year for him, and he's their most important defenseman. I think he's someone that needs to kind of get his game to a different stage where he needs to be more on the positive side of things that are happening on this team, right? And so I think he's one, depending on what changes are made going into the offseason. I think William Nylander is another player that's going to be him and Berube. I'm curious to see how that dynamic's going to work, because Nylander is not exactly, Craig Berube's style of player, let's just say. But I think given that he's signed here long term, the Leafs aren't exactly in a position to move him. I think he's going to be a player that's going to have to take a different approach to how he plays. I think Berube is going to be pushing that on him.
Obviously, there's been talk of changes to the core of the Maple Leafs, not necessarily being able to keep all four of the big four. What, if any, changes do you see on the roster, and how does the coaching change influence those?
I really wonder what happens with Mitch Marner. If let's say they don't trade Mitch Marner, he's someone I think that Craig Berube is going to be. There's going to be some. That's another player. I wonder if him and Berube are going to be able to mix well, because Marner's not exactly. I wouldn't say he's not good with criticism, because we don't know too much of how he's dealt with criticism. But I wonder, will Berube try to get him to play the way that he is capable of when the pressure's on, right? That's when this team really struggles, when the pressure's on. So I just don't see with him needing a new contract and the team just not having enough money to sign all these guys. Marner seems like it has been the odd man out in a lot of scenarios with what the Leafs do. So I think his status is something I think a lot of people will be keeping an eye on. I think he gets moved just because it's a numbers game. They don't have the money to. I mean, they have the money. It's just not feasible to have so many guys making over, $11 million. You can't pay. I can't see this team having four forwards making $11 million past next season, right? So I think he's one. John Zararis, I think there's an opportunity where you consider it, but you also have to think about he's not a guy that's going to look to make more in the next contract. He is likely going to take less, especially if he wants to stay in Toronto. So I think he's someone that I would think twice before moving, just because of that reason. Maybe just for the 1 year, you say, okay, we got him for this year. Let's see if we can make it work, and then visit how we can take some of that money that he would have made or he's making now and put it towards other part of the roster.
If they trade Marner, or let's just say whatever moves they make, what are they looking to get in return? What's the area they want to build up?
Oh, that blue line needs the most work. Right now they only have four defensemen signed. They got Rielly, McCabe, Timmins, and Benoit signed. That, to me, that's the biggest area of need that they need to fix. And I don't see them. I mean, Timmins could be a guy that gets moved just because, I don't know, he's making a lot of money for a player that doesn't play every day. So that's probably the biggest challenge that Brad Sullivan has this offseason, is to get that blue line fixed. And also, I think they need to address center ice. They have, obviously, when you have Matthews and Zararis, that's a pretty good start. David Kampf had a down year, and he got a raise last year. Not exactly what you want to see in that situation, but I do think that they need to address. Those are the areas you need to address if you want to be a cup contender. Your depth down the middle and on the blue and in upgrading the blue line. I think those are two big areas.
All right. Should be a very interesting offseason. I know you'll have it covered every step of the way. David, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, just go over to the Locked On Leafs podcast, wherever you get your podcast from, or subscribed on YouTube there. And also you can follow the show at Locked On Leafs, and you can follow my stuff over on X at @the_Morassutti.
David, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Appreciate it, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Avalanche, Kyle Sullivan. And Kyle, a disappointing end to a season with very high expectations. What went wrong against the Dallas Stars that caused this season to end the way it did?
Oh, Gil, you know just as well as I do. We have 30 minutes to talk about these things. I think it'd be better to ask what went right. And not much. When it comes to coming into this Dallas series, the Colorado Avalanche were highly touted as the highest scoring team in the NHL. Well, you got outscored in this series against Dallas. You allowed Dallas to have at least 5 games over 3 goals. You had 3 of those games scoring 1 goal. I don't know what the Avalanche are hoping to accomplish here. And it's one of those you can look back and, yes, they stayed alive with their backs against the wall, but that's too little too late. The Avalanche, looking at this roster at completion at the end of the season, you could look back and see this roster top to bottom. The Avalanche should not have been in this situation. And they just waited too long, kind of stuck to their guns a little too long, and now they're playing golf instead of playing for the next round.
You talk about the lack of goal production. Was this something that the Stars did well to bottle up the Avs, or was there something the Avalanche didn't do well in order to get enough scoring chances?
Well, the Avalanche, with Nathan McKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, and Cale Makar on that top line, you know everything. The tempo is dictated through that line. Nate had 2 goals in the series. Mikko had 2 goals in the series, and Cale had 3. You're getting outscored by Tally Sagan, by Johnston, and Stankoven. They both had 3 goals. The Dallas Stars, Vegas style, similar to last year, know how to distribute the goals top to bottom. And the Stars did a good job at stacking it up, making it difficult, making it uncomfortable, and making the Avs turn over the puck, starting at that top line where you felt like you were constantly climbing uphill in every game.
Was there one line or maybe 1 or 2 players who you think really were the biggest disappointments in this series for Colorado?
Well, with the absence of Gabe Landeskog over 2 years, you were hoping for somebody, when their backs are against the wall, when things aren't going your way, for somebody to step up and be the leader on this team. And you just did not see that. And oddly enough, going into the Winnipeg series, there were so many questions around Alexander Georgiev as goalie and what you were going to do against Connor Hellebuck. Fast forward to this series, he was the best player for the Avalanche on this entire team. He was incredible, going head-to-head with Ottinger, who looked like a Vezina winner in this series. He was incredible, not allowing mistakes, and neither did Georgiev. He did everything in his power for everybody in front of him to step up, and nobody wanted to take that and run with it. there was no push and no fire from anybody. It was just there was no reaction either. The Avs just kept hoping to outscore their problems, but you have to put goals in the net to do that.
Does this speak at all to you talk about a leadership vacuum in the locker room? What about the coaching staff and the way they led or inspired or didn't inspire this team?
Well, Jared Bednar, he's one of the best, and what he does, he's a player's coach. He knows the capabilities of this team, and let's not beat around the bush here. They lost Val Nichushkin, and that was a big blow to this team. But you heard Bednar and saying, yes, it was a factor. You hope Nichushkin goes and finds the help that he needs, but you still have to play the game. And it's not an excuse for the rest of the players playing as they do. Like, this is the playoffs. You have to step it up a level. And for this team to just stay stagnant and take a step back a little bit was a little telling, but that falls on the players. The coach can do so much. He's firing them up, putting out the best roster he can. He's doing the right shifts. He broke up later in this series, Nathan MacKinnon and Mikko Rantanen, just to get things going. Jared Bednar is doing all that he can. It's on the players. Without a captain, you have to step up and eventually play for the name on the front of the jersey, because at the end of the day, you're just seeing the names walking off, and those are the ones that are held accountable.
You mentioned Landeskog. What is his future like? Do you expect him to be ready to play in the fall, or how serious going forward is this injury going to be?
Well, it's serious enough for this to be year 3 going into next year on, is he capable of returning to NHL action? You've been seeing little clips, little 5 to 10 second clips out on social media of him making skates and cuts, and everybody is analyzing. Everybody has become a doctor through this whole Gabe Landeskog situation on, is he ready? And the timetable was he would be ready for the playoffs, but of course, there's no point of bringing Gabe Landeskog back for playoff action. You're waiting till next year. It's interesting to see. And again, like I mentioned with Valeri Nichushkin, the Avs don't have a lot of money to put a team back together for this upcoming year. So what are you going to do with Nichushkin money? And if Gabe comes back, you have to pay him to play. And what are you going to do with that money as well? There's a lot of questions coming up for this Avalanche team. And is Gabe Landeskog going to be a part of, is it a nice story, or do you want to win a championship?
If you're going to win a championship without Gabe Landeskog, you need a new leader to step in and take that C and be the guy sort of holding this team together. Who on this roster do you think would be a candidate to do it, and why weren't they able to do it this past playoff series?
Well, it's one of those that they've gone without putting a C on a jersey for a reason, out of respect to Landeskog, but this is a subject that has to be addressed going into this season, and the answer is Nathan MacKinnon, and has been Nathan MacKinnon. He has been, admirably saying, Gabe is our captain. Well, you got bounced to Seattle in round 1 last year. You got bounced to Dallas in round 2. Eventually, somebody's going to have to be taking over the leadership, and it's Nathan MacKinnon. You've been here. You won the cup for us in 22. You have to step up and hold accountability. You have to be the voice for those that you are with, and it's going to have to be Nathan MacKinnon, whether Landeskog comes back or not, because he's going to have to take the C, and he's going to have to take this team to the next level, because as it is right now, they're not there.
Talk to me about Zach Parise. I know he announced his retirement. He will not end up winning that elusive Stanley Cup, but what did he contribute during his limited time in Denver?
It was so great to see, and especially for the hardcore Avalanche fans, it's interesting to root for a former Minnesota Wild player in an Avalanche sweater, but my goodness, he made it happen. He was a respectable hockey IQ force out there, and an idol to Casey Middlestead, who is a member of the Avalanche now, and it was cool to see that dynamic working out on the ice. And it was one of those that the team wanted to win one for Parise the more it went. And like I said, he's a former rival. He was not well liked in Avalanche circles. And for him to be one of those, we got to win one for Parise, that shows you how much he won over the team and the fan base.
Obviously, you mentioned the salary cap crunch. What changes do you expect this offseason? How do the Avs deal with that?
Oh, it's going to be interesting. Pop the popcorn, sit and watch social media this offseason. The Avalanche moves are going to be incredible because, like I mentioned, Valeri Nichushkin and Gabe Landeskog contract. What do they also do with Drew N? They completely rehabbed and revitalized that man's career, and he's going to be making bank. What are you going to do with Casey Middlestead? He was also finally a 2C on the Colorado Avalanche. Who would have thought? They have one of those as well. What do you do with the money there? You don't have a lot of money to throw around right now. Jack Johnson wants to come back. He was incredible all year long. The Avalanche have a lot of question marks and not a lot of money to answer those questions. So do they address it in the draft or in moves? Time will tell.
Going to be an interesting offseason, no question about that. I know you and your co-host will have that covered every step of the way. Kyle, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
You can find the show on Twitter X at LOPN_Avalanche. You can find us on YouTube. We're there every day. You can see our smiling faces. Or if you want to just hear us, find us anywhere you get your podcasts.
And on social media?
You can find me at Shaggy Von Doom.
All right. Kyle, always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
It's always an honor.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. I want to thank my guest, David Morassutti of Locked On Leafs, Kyle Sullivan of Locked On Avalanche, and Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget, we are here every day, Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the National Hockey League. So make sure you subscribe and join us for all the latest news and opinions. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.